Good morning and welcome to BPA's EIM Stakeholder Meeting today, December 18th, 2018. My name is Agnes Lute and I am the Grid Modernization EIM Stakeholder Engagement Lead. Topics for today's meeting include timeline review, topics that we've discussed to date, and issues that BPA presented at the July 24th EIM Stakeholder Meeting that we will be discussing in more depth today. Specifically, we will be going over the EIM settlements process between BPA and the CAISO. Topics we have discussed to date include market power, treatment of transmission, generation participation model for the FCRPS, and governance. Future meetings will discussing relationship of the EIM to other emerging markets, resource efficiency, and carbon obligations in the EIM. As stated at the first EIM stakeholder meeting in July, these are the principles we believe would remain essential as BPA moves forward through this process. 1. Participation is consistent with statutory, regulatory, and contractual obligations. Please note that BPA has refined Principle number 1 based on customer feedback and added contractual obligations as part of its participation. Maintaining reliable delivery of power and transmission to our customers. And principle number 3, resource participation in the EIM is and always will be voluntary, preserves operational decision-making for resource participation for its participating resources, and is adaptable with experience. Principle 4, if BPA determines that joining the EIM is not in BPA's or the region's best interest, it will not join. However, BPA will continue to focus on grid modernization projects to achieve objectives of the strategic plan. Joining the EIM will be based on several factors that cultivate a sound business rationale. Timeline leading up to the ROD. As you can see, we've had several meetings related to the EIM, provided an EIM 101. At the next EIM stakeholder meeting on January 16th, we will focus on resource efficiency and the relationship of the EIM to other emerging markets. Please note that in the March, April, and May EIM stakeholder meetings, these will likely be full-day meetings, and we will conduct tabletop exercises in the afternoon. Signing of the EIM implementation agreement authorizes BPA to begin spending money on EIM implementation projects identified in the Grid Modernization Roadmap with the CAISO, but does not bind BPA to join the EIM. This high-level visual represents the general steps in the process of BPA joining the EIM. BPA can choose to not join the EIM at any time in the process. BPA will continue customer and stakeholder meetings throughout the process until go live. We are planning to hold monthly stakeholder meetings leading up to the record of decision in September. In response to stakeholder comments received from the November EIM stakeholder meeting, I would like to clarify. Records of decision will be associated with the EIM implementation agreement, as well as TC22 and BP22.
Okay, so my name is Laura Green. And today I'm going to be going over our approach to the EIM settlements and the work that we've done to try to figure out what it would take for Bonneville to stand up an EIM settlements function within BPA. So I'm going to start on slide 9 and go over the goal for today's training. The goal is to educate you on the process and impacts regarding BPA's relationship with the market operator or CAISO, and to better prepare you for ongoing EIM stakeholder engagements on the topic of settlements. So today's presentation is going to focus on 5 major areas: the introduction to BPA's EIM settlements approach, the overview of settlements interactions if BPA were to join the EIM, educate you on existing EIM processes, review BPA's identified EIM settlement processes challenges we've identified, and work through some simple EIM settlement scenarios. So our long-term objectives throughout this initiative, we have a couple. So the first one is to support BPA strategic plan objectives, which include modernizing the assets and operations, strengthening our financial health, and providing competitive power products and services. We also want to support the ease of doing business with BPA for our customers in a simplified process to the extent possible, and enable transparency of processes and information with our customers, and provide a high quality, both accurate and timely output for our customers. This is the approach that we took throughout our settlement scoping. Prior to scoping, we had heard that the settlements portion of joining the CAISO EIM would be the most difficult and most challenging part, but we didn't really have specifics on what was challenging or what was difficult. So when we went about that, what we did is, first of all, we started in April and we wanted to understand the requirements for a successful EIM settlements function. And then also we wanted to better understand the challenges that folks that had already joined were experiencing. So we wanted to understand challenges and impacts to BPA and our customers. So in order to do this, we gathered information by watching CAISO web-based trainings. We benchmarked with other existing EIM entities. We reviewed CAISO business practice manuals and configuration guides. We attended external training courses on provided by different settlement vendors, and we also just talked to our internal subject matter experts on the topic. So once we had a better understanding of what we needed to focus on, we started identifying processes we should further develop in our scoping approach. So now that we understood the challenges, what should we do to be more prepared if we decided to join the market? So our preliminary evaluation of internal processes and functions included we needed to stay integrated with the replacement of the customer billing center, so our existing billing system. We also needed to stay closely connected with the customer portal, which is our interface with customers where we share meter data, contract data, billing data. And also we need to stay closely integrated with the agency metering system upgrade. Because in the future, if we stand up a settlement system, we will need the interconnections with the billing system. We will need a way for our customers to log on to a secure portal where they can access their statements and their invoices from Bonneville. Since it's such large volumes of data, it's 5-minute data. We'll need a secure place, and then updating some of our metering processes. In addition, we are now following all of the CAISO stakeholder engagement efforts. So as they're proposing new changes, we are monitoring them and trying to decide if there's anything we want to push ourselves through the CAISO EIM stakeholder process. So this next section is on our EIM settlement interactions. And slide 14, what this is a map of our interactions with customers within this EIM market. So on the left-hand side, other balancing authority areas, those are other BAs that have already joined CAISO that are Interties touch. So that could be, for example, Pacificor. And on the right-hand side, other balancing authority areas that are non-EIM entities, those are becoming few and far between, but for example, that could be Tacoma. They are their own BA, and yet Bonneville shares interchange points with them. Then the blue square in the middle, that represents Bonneville's balancing area. On the left-hand side, you have federal resources that BPA operates, and on the right side, you have non-federal resources that customers operate. So in the first square green box, our participating resources are Big Ten. Those are the Big Ten hydro projects that Bonneville plans to participate into the EIM market. We will bid in, for example, the output from Grand Coulee, Chief Joe, Lower Snake, Lower Granite, Little Goose, etc. And then on the right-hand side, the participating resources that are our customers that they decide to bid into the market. And those are to be determined because we don't know yet who from within Bonneville's BA may decide to join the CAISO. So whatever participating resources there are, they will settle directly with CAISO even though they are in our BA. They will receive regular weekly invoices from CAISO. Then going back to the left-hand side under federal resources, the non-participating resources, all others, those are our federal 21 dams, including Energy Northwest. So the dams along the Snake and all the way up into Canada. And then on the right-hand side, the non-participating resources, all others, those are other customers with generating resources within Bonneville's BA that they choose not to voluntarily bid in those resources into the market. So if our customers choose to bid in their resources, they'll be on the top, settling directly with CAISO, and if you're a non-participating resource, you will settle with Bonneville Transmission. So one of the questions I often get is, why are non-federal, non-participating resources impacted? So that lower right-hand square. And that's because, so by joining the energy imbalance market, Bonneville is essentially enabling EIM transactions to occur within our BA. So for this reason, the CAISO market operator will be optimizing dispatches to the participating resources based on the entire BA footprint. So, and that will be on base schedules. But even though CAISO will not be sending dispatches to our non-participating resources, aka they're not bidding into the market, those non-participating resources, if they deviate from their submitted base schedule, it impacts how the overall market performs because we always have to balance our BA. So any deviations from their base schedule will impact the market. So that's why non-participating resources, our interchange, our loads are all settled for the EIM. So this next section is the current overview of the CAISO processes. So on slide 16, so the question is, what are EIM settlements as it pertains to CAISO and BPA? So settlements are the processes related to and resulting in invoices of charges and credits for EIM activity. This could include settlements related data submission and collection. So there's large volumes of data, since it's a 5-minute market, that will need to be sent between the settlements function and CAISO for both participating resources and for the scheduling entity coordinator. We will need to perform shadow settlement. So for all the invoices you receive, you will need to verify and validate the charges and credits. You will also be receiving invoicing of EIM charge codes, and you need to verify them. There's the payment and receipt of funds for EIM charges and credits. You will need to submit to CAISO any disputes if you see something wrong with your invoice, and you'll need to follow their dispute timing calendar. And then there's also pre-settlements analysis, so looking at your daily market transactions to verify everything was accurate, and then looking at those daily transactions and communicating to your front office, to your the bidding strategy, anything they could do to optimize how we participated in the market. So again, this is a settlements function where you would be communicating to the front office to optimize how they're participating into the market. This starts to talk about the CAISO process. So CAISO invoices EIM entities and participating resources weekly for EIM settlements. So the invoices will come Wednesday by 10 a.m. There are exceptions for holidays. And the invoice is the payment that is owed to CAISO, And a payment advice is their term for a credits or money that's owed to you. So all payments for weekly invoices are due by 10 a.m. 4 business days after the date the invoice is published. So typically that's around 10 a.m. the following Tuesday. And then if CAISO owes you any money, they will send you a payment advice also on the 4th business day by 2 p.m. This is their settlement statements. So the settlement statements, which is again available online, you can look at all your market activity for the day before. They're published daily. Then you will receive invoices for which you need to pay at a minimum of guaranteed 3 versions, but you could receive up to 7. So the guaranteed statements you'll receive is the trade day plus 3 business days out, so it's called trade T plus 3B. And you will always receive a trade day plus 12 business days and then a trade day plus 55 business days. You'll notice all final meter data is due by T48. So before you receive your day 55 invoice, all final meter data is due. Then the remaining 4 versions you may or may not receive depending upon if there was maybe a dispute filed and different entities within the market need to be trued up for that credit or charge, or if there was an error in a calculation. The CAISO remains revenue neutral, so any adjustments that have come in would be trued up on a subsequent invoice. So that's why you may receive one for T plus 9 months out, 18 months out, 33 months out, and then 36 months or 3 years out. So the CAISO considers the trade day 55 as their final statement. They would, ideally like to have their market closed by then, but that doesn't always occur. This goes over the dispute process. So CAISO disputes are based upon the settlement statement, so that's what's posted daily. And the chart below is the time you have to file a dispute based upon the settlement statement. So in the first column on the left, the T3 you can't dispute, but the T12 you can dispute. So you have essentially, from you receive the T12 invoice, you have 14 days to dispute it. The deadline for that is the trade day plus 26 business days. And then, for example, the next line down, once you receive the trade day 55 invoice, you have approximately 22 days to dispute that. That dispute is due by the 77th business day. So the chart can kind of be overwhelming, but if you just try to remember that in general, once you receive the settlement statement, disputes are roughly due around 21 business days after they are published. And then the last one, the statement that's 3 years out or 36 months, that's not disputable because that's the CAISO closing of the market. So any discrepancies needed to be cleared up prior to then. And I think the key here is that the settlement statements need to be running through a shadow settlements on a daily basis as the statements are posted so that discrepancies can be found in a timely manner and you can file them. You wouldn't want to wait for the weekly invoice before downloading the settlement statement files. Otherwise, your amount of work you would need to verify would just be overwhelming. There's 3 primary applications of settlements in the EIM. So you're going to settle with your generating resources, your interchange, and your load. Now within your generating resources, you have 2 categories, your participating and your non-participating. Your participating, those are generators who are electing or voluntarily participating by offering resource bids into the EIM market. So they have a distinct and direct relationship with the CAISO, or they're a participating resource scheduling coordinator. So for Bonneville, that's going to be our Big 10 hydro projects within the FCRPS. And then it's to be determined which non-federal resources within our BA may choose to participate. And then our non-participating resources, that applies to generating resources within our BA that are not voluntarily bidding their resources into the market. The second category is interchange, or CAISO calls it an intertie. And those are points of interchange between neighboring balancing authority areas to EIM entities. Earlier in the presentation, we talked about how we touch both like Pacificor's BA and Tacoma's BA. And then load, that's settling all the load within Bonneville's balancing authority area. So as a reminder, all settlements occur between CAISO and the EIM entity, except settlements for participating resources, which settle directly with CAISO. These are the CAISO 42 distinct charge codes, and we're not going to go through all of them today, but essentially there are 5 that are applicable to participating resources as a scheduling coordinator. There's 12 applicable to the EIM scheduling coordinator or Bonneville transmission, and then there's 25 that could be applicable to both or either. So many of these charges and credits will be applied depending on how we operate against CAISO's expectations, or per our base schedule and per our forecast. So these are the charges that will be assessed to Bonneville. However, EIM entities, we have the flexibility to determine how we'll pass along these charges and credits to our customers, reflected within our tariff and our rate case process. So if Bonneville decides to join the CAISO EIM, this would be through our rate case in 2022 and our tariff change process in also 2022, or that would become effective in 2022. These are the categories of charge codes. So there's 4 major categories, and we've organized them in these categories just to try to make sense of what they represent. The scenarios we're going to run through later will be within that first area of the imbalance energy area. So the first primary charges are imbalance energy, and that includes instructed and uninstructed. And then there's also ancillary services. That's where you get a lot of your flex ramp charges. Then the next category is market clearing, neutrality, and cost recovery. Since CAISO is revenue neutral, they have charges and credits to balance out the market and to make folks whole. So there's several, including cost recovery, congestion, bid cost recovery, pass-throughs, etc. Then there's the category of timing and process efficiency. So those charges include, like, if you pay your invoice late or other shortfall allocations or interest. And then the last category is administration charge codes. And those are fees you pay for just being a member of the CAISO market. This is a graph of the energy imbalance, or the imbalance energy. So the imbalance energy charge codes are really important because they make up about 70 to 80% of the dollars that are transacted in the EIM, and again will be the focus of our scenarios we'll walk through. So IEE, or Instructed Energy Imbalance, is all about where CAISO, the market operator, expects you to be at based upon the information you provided them. So the top one, the 15-minute market, or FMM, is your instructed energy imbalance. That's charge code 64600. Then you have your real-time dispatch, or RTD, and that's also your instructed energy imbalance, 64700. And then you have your uninstructed energy imbalance, and that's charge code 64750. So on the graph, you can see as you go through time, your instructed imbalance energy will touch 2 of the charge codes, and then your uninstructed is essentially where CAISO instructed you to be at and where you actually went to. So the green numbers represent the charge codes, and then the blue triangles represent the deltas. So starting on the left, you submit your base schedules at T-40 on where you plan to be, and then CAISO would send the participating resource the FMM, or their 15-minute market schedule. So that first charge code is the difference between where you said you would be at your base schedule versus where CAISO instructed you to be. And then the second charge code is the difference between CAISO's, what they sent you to be for your 15-minute schedule, and then your dispatch operating target. So that difference makes up your second real-time dispatch imbalance charge code. And then the last one is the difference between where CAISO instructed you to be at for your dispatch operating target, and then your metered actual where you actually were when the time period closed. Slide 24 is about ancillary services and cost recovery. So we're not going to go through ancillary services charges today, but we do have another workshop planned in March 2019 where we'll go over more of our ancillary services. Ancillary services and cost recovery, they are not the same as Bonneville's ancillary services charges. These ones more fall with uplift charges and ramp ups. So they include over and under scheduling, real-time imbalance energy, flexible ramp uplifts, real-time bid cost recovery, real-time congestion offset, and real-time marginal losses offsets. So this next section on EIM settlement process challenges, this section details some of the areas where through scoping that we've identified we believe might be challenging given today's EIM settlement process. So these are in order of priority based upon BPA's belief of their level of difficulty in resolving adequately. It outlines the 5 challenges we've identified. The CAISO dispute submission timing window, the market data transparency, the number and timing of recalculation settlement statements, frequency of CAISO invoices, and settlement quality meter data submission timing. So the first one on slide 27 is about the dispute submission timing. So the current CAISO process allows an average dispute window closing around 21 business days from the settlement statement publish date. So the challenge for this is, how do we enable BPA's customers the ability to review data and file a dispute within CAISO's filing window? 21 days is just so short. If we consider today Bonneville bills its customers on a 30-day calendar, how would Bonneville receive the invoice, pass it quickly to our customers, and allow them time to issue a dispute if something was wrong with it, get it back to Bonneville, and then Bonneville submit that to CAISO within the 21 days? I think that's why we've seen some customers such as PGE opt to go to billing their customers weekly. So our goal within this challenge is essentially to ensure customers have access to the settlement data early enough to have the opportunity to have review and file a dispute if warranted. Customers' capability to process these large volumes of data in a relatively short period of time will be difficult. So we don't know how to mitigate for this yet, but it is just something we need to monitor, this short window in time for which we have to file a dispute. This is our market data transparency challenge. So currently in the EIM process is that some data used to calculate the EIM settlement charge codes amounts is considered proprietary. So you don't have access to all the data necessary to recreate or validate your charges and credits. So EIM entities have the flexibility to determine how and which settlement support data they provide to their customers in addition to their own invoice. So the challenge is about 5 to 10% of the charge code dollars can't be 100% verified because it's proprietary data. So a lack of a centralized repository for market data results in inconsistent sharing of supporting settlement data amongst EIM entities. So ideally, you would be able to have access to all the customers within the EIM market, meter data, forecast data, bidding data, etc. However, we haven't met or found entities who are willing to share all that proprietary data. So essentially this means we'll not be able to ensure all the money that's transferred in this market from BPA to CAISO or our customers will be 100% correct given the current situation today. And an example of this is the flexible ramping charge and the measured demand charge. So those are charges that we know can't be fully validated because we only have access to our data. We don't have access to all of the general market data, for instance, like the prices. So we can't completely verify the allocations are correct. So if Bonneville is receiving payment advice or a credit, we can't verify that that credit amount is the actual accurate amount unless we knew what all the other customers' credit was to verify that amount. So the transparency challenge is really twofold. One is that some of the data that's being used in the billing determinants we don't have access to. And then the second issue is how customers choose to bill their participating or non-participating resources. There's not a consistent format. Some people provide lots of backup data to support their charges, and some people provide little to no backup data to verify the charges. So the current EIM process is, like I mentioned earlier, you're guaranteed to get 3 revisions at your T3, your T12, and your T55 business days, but likely you're going to get 4 additional ones. So the recalculation statements could be considered similar to BPA's prior period adjustment, where the delta from, or any differences from one invoice to the next, it goes on the next invoice as a true-up rather than revising previously issued invoices. So this creates impacts to our financial accounting because accounting always wants us to close out a fiscal year and not go back and reopen the books. But when we are looking at statements that possibly go back 3 years, this would just be a new paradigm shift for us where we are opening up previous fiscal accounting years. The other challenge is the timing between the T55 and say the T36 is lengthy. So if you have a credit owed to you, it's not going to be how it is dealing with Bonneville today where you would get that credit in the next month. It could be potentially 4 months before that true-up is resolved and you receive a credit or charge. So this is more posing a financial burden on Bonneville because when we first get started, the CAISO process will invoice us weekly. So we will be receiving weekly invoices on our power side for our Big 10 participating resources and on the transmission side for being a scheduling entity coordinator. And we will need to pay on those invoices mandatory weekly. So if we continue with our current process of billing our customers monthly, we will need to pay on 4 invoices or 8 invoices both on the power and transmission for an entire month, and then the following month is when we would invoice our customers. And if we had something similar to a net 20 where customers have 20 days to pay, the funds for those invoices won't be coming in till the very end of the second month. So Bonneville would need to have enough cash flow on hand to essentially pay these invoices for about 2 months before we started being reimbursed. So the challenge is it bears a financial burden, the timing of the invoices. And also we don't really have a good magnitude of how much these weekly invoices to CAISO are. We're doing some research with them, and we're trying to get a ballpark, but we still don't have a good idea for how much these weekly invoices will be. So how much cash we need to have on hand when we very first get started. The last challenge we identified, and this is related to our settlement quality meter data submission timing. So the current EIM process is meter quality needs to be turned into CAISO by T48. So there's no penalties for updated meter data, but there are penalties if you submit meter data late. And so the penalty is $1,000 per day per meter point. So the challenge of that is when BPA looked at its historical data and processes, there are multiple times where Bonneville receives late meter data from the field due to maybe a customer-owned meter, or we didn't know maybe a meter was malfunctioning. But going forward, we will need to tighten up those processes so we can mitigate for those $1,000 a day penalties. So what we're looking at is maybe reprogramming of our meters to report events or other metering investments so that they can quickly detect if there's a meter malfunction. We're considering increasing our field personnel to respond to such issues. If we know a meter is tripped offline, we quickly send personnel out there to take a look at it. And then internal meter validation. So within our metering department, looking at our metering validation process to make sure it's as robust as possible to catch any discrepancies.
This is Brianna Allen, the project manager for EIM Settlement Scoping. And in this portion of the presentation, we're going to cover some simplified EIM settlement scenarios. But first, let's set some context to get us started. We will be working through scenarios for each of the 4 settlement allocation categories mentioned earlier in the presentation: participating resources, non-participating resources, interchange, and load imbalance. Each scenario will be from the perspective of BPA's relationship with CAISO as the market operator, and are not reflective of potential allocations between Bonneville and our customers, as that is still to be determined. Reviewing these scenarios should provide a basic understanding of the allocation nuances between these different allocation categories and support future workshops and conversations on the direct impacts to our customers. Each scenario today will focus on the settlements related to the primary charge codes for Imbalance energy, as these charge codes make up approximately 70 to 80% of the dollars transacted in the market. And while these are common, simplified scenarios, it should also be noted that there are exceptions or caveats to each example given. So while the rules or statements for these simplified examples are generally true, there may be more complicated circumstances that change the outcome to some degree. We are not going to get into those today, but wanted to mention that as a possibility. All scenarios will be based on CAISO's current financially binding schedule submission timeline of trade hour, or T, minus 40 minutes, since these scenarios are reflective of how CAISO would settle with Bonneville in the EIM. Using this timeline is not a signal of any sort of BPA policy to come, but simply CAISO's process as it stands today. All volumes will be shown in megawatts. All locational marginal prices, or LMPs, will be shown in megawatt hours, and all amounts will be rounded to 0 decimal places. As a reminder of the 3 Imbalance energy charge codes, we have charge code 64600, which is the 15-minute market instructed imbalance energy settlement, or FMM-IIE, and is a comparison between the base schedule and FMM schedule amounts. Charge code 64700, which is the real-time dispatch, or 5-minute market instructed imbalance energy settlement, also known as RTD-IIE, is a comparison between the FMM schedule amounts and the 5-minute dispatch operating target amounts. And lastly, charge code 64750 is the real-time dispatch uninstructed imbalance energy settlement, or RTD UIE, which is a comparison between the 5-minute dispatch operating target amounts and the metered actual amounts. Since there hasn't been much information provided previously on locational marginal prices, we wanted to provide some highlights since they are a component of the scenarios. Essentially, a LMP represents the marginal cost of providing the next increment of energy demand, or in essence, the cost to serve the next megawatt of load at a given location. There are thousands of LMP points known as P nodes within the EIM area, and each one is made up of 3 primary components to determine the cost to serve that next megawatt of load: congestion, line losses, and a greenhouse gas compliance component for serving California load. These LMPs allow the EIM to efficiently determine the interaction between energy supply and energy demand. If you're interested in learning more about LMPs, check out the appendix at the end of this presentation. Getting back to the imbalance energy charge codes, there are 4 main categories of volumes used in these calculations. Base represents the base schedule submitted to CAISO by their financially binding deadline, which is currently T-minus 40 minutes and is submitted as an hourly value. FMM RTUC is the 15-minute market real-time unit commitment schedule, for which there are 4 intervals per hour. For participating resources, these scheduled amounts are supplied by the CAISO. RTD is the real-time dispatch operating targets, which are in 5-minute increments resulting in 12 intervals per hour. Again, for participating resources, these targets are supplied by CAISO. And the metered actuals are the 5-minute actual amounts that were metered. In the EIM, all participating resources must have 5-minute granularity for settlement quality metering. Any other metering with a granularity larger than 5 minutes will be divided by the CAISO into 5-minute intervals as appropriate for settlements. For example, a 60-minute interval metered value will be divided by 12. In addition to the 4 volumes, there are 2 LMPs that are used for the imbalance energy settlements. FMM LMPs are calculated at the same time the 15-minute market optimizations run, and RTD LMPs are calculated at the same time the RTD market optimizations run. There's a slight variation for settling load imbalance, which uses load aggregation point pricing, or LAP pricing, instead of LMP, which I will get into in more detail during the load imbalance scenario. Each of these scenarios are going to follow similar formats. We'll start with our participating resource. First, we'll look at charge code 64600, which is the 15-minute market instructed imbalance energy settlement. A base schedule for the participating resource is submitted on time for 100 megawatts. CAISO runs their 15-minute market optimizations over the course of the next hour and results in the 15-minute market real-time unit commitment scheduled amounts for the hour of 112, 86, 100, and 90 megawatts. In order to determine the settlement amounts for the FMM IIE, we take the difference between the base schedule and the FMM real-time unit commitment and divide by 4 in order to convert megawatt volumes to megawatt hours. Then multiply that by the FMM locational marginal prices. This is the only imbalance energy charge code where we apply the FMM LMPs. If we walk through the first interval calculations as an example, we are taking the base minus the FMM schedule, so 100 minus 112, which gives us a value of negative 12 megawatts. Then we divide that by 4 to convert to megawatt hours, which results in negative 3 megawatt hours. And lastly, we multiply that by the FMM interval's LMP of $20 to end up with a credit to Bonneville of $60 for that interval. Doing this for the remainder of the intervals results in charges or $0 settlements and a resulting $67 charge for the hour. It's nearly the same process for the real-time dispatch IIE, except now we are working in 5-minute intervals instead of 15, and we slide down a level in the volumes. In between the FMM market optimization runs that are occurring, there are also RTD market run optimization runs occurring as well, which produce the real-time dispatch instructions and RTD LMPs. The differences for charge code 64700 from the FMM IIE we just walked through are that you subtract the RTD amounts from the FMM real-time unit commitment amounts that CAISO calculates and divide the difference by 12 in order to convert megawatt volumes to megawatt hours. Here we also stop using the FMM LMP and begin using the real-time dispatch LMP. Again, if we step through the first interval, we subtract the real-time dispatch amount of 88 megawatts from the 15-minute market schedule amount of 112, which is 24 megawatts. We then divide this by 12, which results in 2 megawatt hours, and we multiply this amount by the corresponding real-time dispatch LMP of $30 per megawatt hour, which results in a charge to Bonneville of $60 for the first interval. Repeating this process throughout the hour results in various charges, credits, and $0 RTD IIE settlements for a total credit of $73 to Bonneville for the operating hour. The third charge code for imbalance energy is 64750, Real-Time Dispatch Uninstructed Imbalance Energy, or RTD UIE. This is the imbalance energy charge code which reflects what actually occurred. Again, to calculate the settlement, we slide one level down on the volumes and are now comparing the RTD values to the metered actual values, which is the only difference in how the uninstructed imbalance energy is calculated compared to the RTD instructed imbalance energy. Since we are still working in 5-minute intervals as we did for the RTD IIE settlement, we divide the difference between the RTD and metered actuals by 12 in order to convert megawatt volumes to megawatt hours. Now that we have our 3 imbalance energy settlement amounts for this participating resource, we combine the hourly settlement subtotals, which in this scenario results in a total credit of $56 to Bonneville for the operating hour. In the next scenario, we will look at how non-participating resources settle differently than participating resources. Although non-participating resources do not actively bid into or participate in the EIM, they are still subject to EIM settlements. The primary difference for non-participating resources in the market is that the FMM real-time unit commitment schedule and RTD operating target values will be equal to the base schedule submitted by CAISO's financially binding timeline. CAISO, as the market operator, does not instruct non-participating resources to ink or dec their generators. They do, however, still calculate the FMM and RTD LMPs for these resources during the market optimization runs. The caveat to this is that the balancing authority area still has the flexibility and authority to send manual dispatch instructions to these generators at any time, which could change the EIM settlement outcome. We'll look at both scenarios. In the case that a 100 megawatt base schedule is submitted by T-40 to the CAISO and no further instructions are made by the balancing authority area, there will be no settlement for the instructed imbalance energy charge codes, as the base schedule, FMM schedules, and RTD operating targets will all be equal at 100 megawatts. Therefore, the only imbalance energy settlement will be for the uninstructed imbalance energy charge code 64750, which again is the settlement for what actually occurred since it includes metered actual amounts. The math remains the same, and in this scenario, the non-participating resource ends up with a total UIE settlement for the operating hour of a $48 credit. If the 100 megawatt base schedule is updated after T-40, there will be some instructed imbalance energy settlement impacts. In this scenario, we are assuming that the balancing authority sends a manual dispatch to ink 20 megawatts at T-0 or the top of the trade hour. How CAISO handles this is that any market run which has not yet processed will include the new manual dispatch amount as the FMM schedule and RTD operating target amounts. At T-0, the first 3 FMM runs have already occurred, so it is only the 4th FMM schedule that is updated to 120 megawatts. Additionally, only the first 2 RTD market runs have occurred at this time. Therefore, the remaining 10 intervals are updated to 120 megawatts. And in this scenario, we assume that the generator follows the dispatch instructions. Therefore, the metered actuals for the entire hour will have increased to reflect meeting the additional demand. So once again, the math is exactly the same as it was for the participating resource settlement for the 15-minute market IIE, where we are subtracting the FMM schedules from the base schedule, dividing by 4, and multiplying by the FMM LMP. And you can see that the manual dispatch resulted in non-zero settlement for the updated 4th interval. I will note that had the instructions been to dec the resource instead of ink the resource, this would have resulted in a charge instead of a credit. For the real-time dispatch instructed imbalance energy charge code, the math again remains the same as with the participating resource, where we take the difference between the FMM schedules and RTD operating targets, divide by 12, and multiply by the RTD LMP. You'll notice that where the FMM schedules and RTD instructions are the same in the first 2 and last 3 intervals, the result is $0 settlement. And where there are differences in volumes in between those intervals, there are non-$0 settlements. Lastly, we again calculate the uninstructed imbalance energy settlement amounts the same as before. With the fluctuations in metered actuals above, below, and equal to 120 megawatts, some intervals result in credits, others charges, and some $0 settlements. When we add the two instructed imbalance energy settlement amounts for the operating hour, which were a $100 credit for the FMM IIE and a $308 credit for the RTD IIE, to the uninstructed imbalance energy credit of $58 for the operating hour, together, we end up with a total imbalance energy settlement for the hour of a 466 credit to Bonneville for this non-participating resource. To conclude this section on non-participating resources, if there are no additional operating instructions from the balancing authority after CAISO's financially binding schedule submission timeline, which is currently T-minus 40 minutes, non-participating resources will only settle for the uninstructed imbalance energy charge, reflecting how they actually operated. But if the balancing authority area does send updated instructions to the resource after that deadline, then there will be settlement for both instructed and uninstructed imbalance energy. Now we'll take a look at how Interchange is settled for imbalance energy. As a point of clarification, Bonneville uses the term interchange, whereas CAISO uses the term intertie, but they are meant to be one and the same. Interchange will settle at the point of interchange identified between balancing authority areas, and typically only settles for instructed imbalance energy. Similar to non-participating resources, the interchange base schedule is due to CAISO by T-minus 40, and any updates to the schedule after T-minus 40 will be handled the same way, by applying the changes to the 15-minute market and real-time dispatch market optimization runs which haven't yet processed. For the following interchange example, we are going to take our previous non-participating resource scenario with a manual dispatch to Inc. 20 megawatts at T-minus 0 and add an export schedule to that, represented by this visual. One key point I want to make with this and the upcoming load imbalance scenario is the notion that load plus exports equals demand, and conversely, generation plus imports equals supply, which means that when we bring load or exports into the equation, we have to multiply everything for that portion of the settlement by -1 to get the inverse of these calculations. As we saw with the non-participating resource scenario, the generator was manually dispatched to Inc. 20 megawatts, so they will be paid to meet that demand. This manual dispatch was a result of a demand schedule being too low, so there will be payment from the interchange point of delivery, since it is the demand that is causing the need to ink the generator. Since the base schedule, FMM schedules, and RTD operating instructions will be the same for the non-participating resource and the point of interchange, dollar differences between the two will be attributed to differences in the LMPs at each location. Here we calculate the FMM IIE for the point of interchange. You can see that the math is the same as before, where we subtract the FMM schedules from the base schedule, divide by 4 to convert to megawatt hours, and multiply by the FMM LMP. But we add the new component of multiplying those results by -1, since exports are considered demand and need to be treated as the inverse of supply. You'll recall that in the non-participating resource example, the fourth interval in this charge code calculation resulted in a $100 credit. In this particular example, I've set the prices at the point of delivery higher than at the generator, but that could be reversed or they could be nearly equal. It all depends on the conditions and constraints setting the prices at each P node. That, paired with the added -1 multiplication, is why we are now seeing a $175 charge to Bonneville for this export 15-minute market IIE settlement. Next, we calculate the real-time dispatch IIE settlement for the point of interchange export, which is the same math as before for this charge code, but again, multiplying by -1 since we're reflecting demand settlement. This results in a total real-time dispatch instructed imbalance energy charge for the operating hour of $410. And when we combine that with the FMM-IIE settlement, this updated tag after T minus 40 example results in a total charge of $585 for the operating hour. A key thing to note here is that if the LMPs at the generator and interchange points are equal, the charge is completely offset and the result will be a net zero settlement. In this example, I've purposely made the LMPs significantly different to prove the example. However, in most cases, there will often only be slight differences due to losses and congestion between the 2 points. So what we end up with is offsetting imbalance energy charges and credits for the non-participating resource and interchange export schedule, with a net settlement of $119 charge to Bonneville as the EIM entity scheduling coordinator. I want to highlight again that in this scenario, the interchange LMPs were higher than the generator LMPs. But if it were reversed and the interchange LMPs were lower than the generator LMPs, then the settlement would be a net credit to the EIM entity instead of a net charge. Or, if the LMPs at both P nodes are essentially the same, the net settlement could be near $0. We aren't going to go through a specific wheel-through interchange settlement example, but I wanted to highlight that wheel-throughs are settled similarly to point, in that both points of interchange into and out of the balancing authority area will be settled for IIE. If one or more of the adjacent balancing authority areas are also an EIM entity, CAISO will settle for interchange with each EIM entity involved. But if one or more of the adjacent balancing authority areas is not an EIM entity, CAISO will settle for interchange only with the EIM entity for that specific point of interchange. This is reflected in the diagram on this slide. Our last scenario will look at a load imbalance settlement. There are a few key differences in how load is settled for imbalance energy than resources and interchange. First, load only settles for uninstructed imbalance energy, which is a comparison of the load-based schedule to the load-metered actuals. But load-metered actuals is a little bit of a misnomer because the value is based on a calculation, which is the sum of all settlement quality meter data for generation, minus the sum of all settlement quality meter data for interchange, minus real-time loss amounts. Load also does not settle at LMP prices, but instead uses what is called a load aggregation point price, or LAP price. The LAP price is calculated as a weighted average of the generation and interchange LMPs for the entire balancing authority area. Lastly, since load metered actuals is represented as a calculation, it is submitted to CAISO at the largest granularity of any specific generation or interchange meter point submitted, but always settles in 5-minute lap values. Let's look at an example. The balancing authority area submits an hourly load-based schedule of 100 megawatts to CAISO. Later, an hourly load value is submitted based on the calculation from the previous slide, again, the sum of the generation minus the sum of the interchange minus real-time losses, at a value of 95 megawatts. These are both converted to 5-minute values to give us our 5-minute load-based schedule and 5-minute load-metered actual amounts, to which the UIE can be calculated using the load aggregation point price, which again is a weighted average hourly price amount. This is why each 5-minute interval is the same. After that, we inverse the totals by multiplying by -1 to account for this being demand, just like we did for the interchange export, which gives the final UIE amount for the operating hour of a $240 credit to Bonneville. If in this scenario the submitted hourly load value had come in higher than the load-based schedule, then this would be a charge to the load, as was the example with the point-to-point interchange export. Or the amounts could be equal, in which case the imbalance energy settlement would be 0. This concludes our EIM settlement scenarios for this presentation.
Slide 59 talks about our in-flight work, so what we are currently working on right now. So the first one is, like I mentioned, looking at our metering inventory and strategy. So looking what we can do to shore up our metering given CAISO settlement quality meter data submission timing window at T+48 business days. We are also continuing to learn more about our charge codes and how they might be applied to Bonneville. We are also defining our internal processes, so looking at our staffing, who might perform these functions, looking at data handoffs and process verifications. In addition, we're staying closely connected with other grid mod projects, such as the customer portal replacement and the replacement of the billing system. And then lastly, we are gearing up for our next customer stakeholder workshop, likely in March 2019. So if there are topics of interest or questions that you would like us to cover in the next training, we would like to hear from you. Our plan right now is to go over some of the other charge codes we didn't cover, but if you have questions for us to cover, please submit them through the Tech Forum email web address.
Hi, this is Russ Manifel from BPA. Next, we're going to talk about non-federal generation participation. So first off, at a high level, we want to articulate that Bonneville, as is a requirement of any open access transmission provider and balancing authority, that we will offer the ability for non-Bonneville generators to be participating resources in the market. At this point in time, there's a lot that we need to develop, but we have a good idea about what some of those requirements are and what some of the relevant questions will be. So at this point, we don't have all the tools and processes that are needed for you to understand exactly how to become a participating resource, but we will be developing those. We are going to offer that participation consistent with principles of open access and non-discrimination. So there will be similar allowances and requirements for non-federal generators as there are for federal generators. And we understand that there will be a lot of policy, tariff, and financial questions that will need to be addressed as part of subsequent processes, specifically the BP and the TC22 processes. Those include, but are certainly not limited to, any impacts this would have in terms of resource efficiency, in terms of the integration charges that variable and dispatchable resources would have as part of the balancing authority, whether this would be part of a self-supply opportunity for customers that's offered under the tariff, what are the data and metering requirements that are necessary, what sort of scheduling coordinator services would be offered by Bonneville, or what the requirements would be for third parties, are there internal transmission requirements, and what are the prior notices. We expect that in terms of prior notice, there will be a couple different time scales. Possibly there would be a prior notice to the extent that it is part of a rate case that's based on the beginning or middle of a rate case, so similar to the prior notice requirements for committed scheduling for variable energy resources that qualify for different integration charges or balancing charges. There might be a prior notice that works backwards from the beginning of the BP22 rate case. At a minimum, there will be some required notice to allow Bonneville and the CAISO to meet whatever individual technical requirements are required to facilitate the resource participation. On to slide 63, Bonneville, as every other EIM entity has done, will develop agreements and business practices that articulate exactly what the rights obligations are of a participating resource and what the process is. Examples of this can be found in other EIM entity tariffs in their EIM attachment. So there's typically a pro forma agreement and then a business practice that provides more detail in terms of what those requirements are and what the process is. So Bonneville expects to have similar agreements and processes that it would need to develop. But what you can know now and what you can look at in terms of getting more background are two agreements that are required by the CAISO. So the first is an EIM Participating Resource Agreement. That is an agreement between the owner of the participating resource and the CAISO. They have a pro forma agreement for that. The other is an EIM Participating Resource Scheduling Coordinator Agreement, which is between the CAISO and the relevant scheduling coordinator that would represent and do data submission and billing for the participating resource. There are multiple existing scheduling coordinators that offer these services, and you can also register to become your own. So at a minimum, you can look at those contracts to get an idea. In addition to that, you can look at the pro forma agreements and the business practices in other EIM entities, tariffs, and OASIS sites, so somebody like Portland General or Pacificor can give you an idea. So we expect this to be an ongoing conversation. As we've said before, if you have a resource in the Balancing Authority and you have questions about what it would look like for that particular resource to participate, contact your transmission AE or this team, and we're happy to talk with you about that at any point in time. And next, I think that we'll talk about the next steps. But if there's any additional questions, you can contact us through TechForum or through your account executive.
Our next meeting is Wednesday, January 16th. We will be discussing resource sufficiency and emerging markets. We welcome your feedback. Your comments will help shape future EIM stakeholder meetings. Comments are due by Thursday, January 3rd. Comments received to date have been posted on BPA's EIM website. Additionally, BPA has posted and developed a grid modernization initiative website. It is now live on bpa.gov. This website also has a link to the grid modernization roadmap of projects. Thank you for participating in today's EIM stakeholder meeting. Your comments are welcome.